Today I'm making my first video in English, and unfortunately I have to read from a script because I can barely put 3 sentences together fluently. Sorry. This video is about crisis, ecstasy and DMT in relation to spirituality. I do not want to encourage anyone to take inspiration from this or try to imitate anything. My experiences, this and my spiritual path over inner healing over the last 16 years have been absolutely extreme. A constant ride through hell on all levels. 16 years ago, I went through a severe physical and psychological crisis. It was not related to spirituality in any way. I wasn't searching for anything, and there was no major trigger. Yet suddenly I became completely emotionally blocked for several months. That means I felt absolutely nothing, which was something entirely unfamiliar to me. Even when I thought about difficulties, I didn't feel the slightest nervousness. At the same time, my digestive system almost completely shut down. I suffered from massive chronic problems and felt an overwhelming sense of meaninglessness and frustration for months. That was the only thing I could feel. I had no emotional connection to my thoughts, my inner world, or even to my friends and acquaintances. I was functioning purely on a rational level. Doctors and therapies didn't help me at all. That's when I came across my then spiritual teacher, Christian Meyer from Berlin. With him, the focus was primarily on inner work, incorporating many therapeutic considerations and psychological insights, but at its core it was about learning to feel emotions in a specific way without doing anything, meaning without engaging with thoughts or impulses. Instead, it was about sensing the emotions, allowing them to rise fully so they could unfold completely and eventually dissolve. I strongly warn against trying this alone or even considering that this might make sense for most people without extensive years-long therapeutic preparation, maturity, a strong sense of responsibility and psychological stability. This can go terribly wrong. However, out of sheer necessity, I saw no other option for myself but to try it. And I was probably fortunate in my misfortune, as I am a very sensitive and perceptive person and had a very stable, healthy core in my psyche that allowed me to engage with this process. During my first winter retreat with him, I experienced a massive, profound awakening. Looking back at the whole process, it seems to me that over the past 15 years I have essentially gone through the Kundalini process, not in the sense of consciously working towards it, as in the tantric path, but rather as a result of my unexpected awakening experience back then. I always did my best to stay active in life, to find motivation, and I never had the idea that the goal was to stop being myself. But I had no way of resisting everything that was happening. Whenever I loosened my focus on my inner processes, my emotions, my breath, my issues and the causes from the past, even just as an experiment for a while, my symptoms quickly re-established themselves and remained chronically at the same level. Nothing changed. I became depressed again and couldn't find the motivation to move forward in life in any way. As a result, I simply had no choice but to continue, not because I wanted to, as I said, or because I expected something great from it. As I mentioned, I had nothing to do with Advaita concepts, no spiritual search. I didn't have any particular expectations. I should say maybe I've read some books about Zen in my teens, but not seriously, just for fun, and was not searching anything seriously in it. I was simply open to whatever would come next. I only loosely accepted the ideas and the explanations from my teacher, and over time saw the whole process more as a practical experiential path for myself, something to work with my specific intense difficulties. This seemed to be the only thing that could somehow ease my condition, allowing everything inside me to release from time to time, bringing deeper peace and relaxation. So I stuck with it. Though, of course, I never expected it to be so persistent and complex. Over time, I discovered that what I was dealing with was severe infant trauma and development trauma. After a few years, another major shift happened, which was even more intense sometime later. I also experienced phases of depersonalization and strong disorientation. Thankfully, not chronically, but only in recent years have these massive issues started to gradually subside. So I had easily over 10 years massive amounts of intense emotions coming up, especially fear. I did not become a spiritual teacher. I don't even hold the idea that spirituality is inherently something good as a general rule. I do not stand for the idea of awakening or enlightenment, but rather for dismantling myths and illusions, countering supposed truths, addictive tendencies, and immature approaches. Through the vast range of experience I've gathered, I aim to bring clarity from a completely neutral and differentiated perspective. Around 13 years ago, I attended the Enlightenment Congress in Berlin for several consecutive years. Many well-known spiritual teachers were present, about 30 to 50 in total, along with a large number of participants. It was a special format where teachers and participants were not distinguished from each other, and anyone could take the microphone without moderation. This led to heated discussions. Many therapists were also present, and trauma was a frequent topic. This allowed me to experience a wide range of perspectives and insights firsthand. I also had long-term friendships with some people who had awakening experience similar to mine, yet had nothing to do with this broader spiritual scene. They also valued the importance of a healthy sense of self and were very personable and accessible with an interest in therapeutic work. Maybe I can come up with alternative, undogmatic explanations for a more practical and down-to-earth integration. At first, I want to say something about a phenomena which is observed in the animal world, and the typical example here is the gazelle in the mouth of the tiger. In the different trauma theories, we have several kinds of coping mechanisms: the fight, flight, or freeze. And in this existential situation, the animal might freeze. It might get completely paralyzed in these hopeless existential situations. But it can also happen that when death seems to come for sure, because it's already bitten in the throat, maybe, that it can happen that the fear, the existential fear, is still highly active, but now the whole body switches into parasympathetic nervous system and completely relaxes. So that the whole process tips over into an ecstasy and several neurotransmitters are activated. For example, a lot of endorphins or other substances that are associated with peace and euphoria. Or a ketamine-like substance that can also have a dissociative effect. Also perhaps DMT, which is released at birth or at death and possibly in situations like near death. DMT is known from ayahuasca and 5-MeO-DMT. You may know it. And all this can lead to really crazy psychedelic-like experiences also in a human being. And I can see a relation here between this phenomena to my own spiritual experiences in the past, and also to the reported dynamics and experiences from many spiritual teachers. Oftentimes, these awakening or liberation experiences seem to happen for many people in a major crisis, with no hope. Oftentimes people report about unbearable existential intense emotions like complete despair or the famous fear of death. I guess everybody knows Ramana Maharshi and his famous report about his awakening, often sentenced like, okay, what I'm supposed to do, then I'll just die. often used in this context. So this consent to death seems to happen in the human consciously via the psyche, so to speak. And when this famous surrender kicks in, it can happen that the whole process tips over into the parasympathetic nervous system, which means that the body completely relaxes. The whole tension in the body and the psyche can possibly completely get released. So the whole experience tips over into an ecstasy, and that can lead to an experience of complete dissolution or disappearing. For some people, it's only the ego, the whole psyche, the whole process in the mind that collapses and disappears. For others, it's even much more. The whole thing, the whole being, sorry, can collapse. The whole consciousness can collapse into nothingness. Maybe even losing consciousness completely can happen for a short time or maybe for an hour. Afterwards, the fact can happen that you are in an intoxication-like state, an ecstasy, perhaps completely egoless state, or so-called unity experience. Unfortunately, some people immediately throw all their Advaita concepts onto that. Something like, that's it, the ego was seen through, the so-called illusion was seen through, and this is the truth, or something like that. And some people manage to make a strange kind of method out of this happening. After a while, the whole psyche and sense of self reorganizes itself, which is, of course, a very good thing, in my opinion. But also, all the painful issues come back, sometimes even more intensely, because the subconsciousness opens up, typically. Sorry. And some people seem to make a method out of this and learning to keep, let's say, their hands off every pattern in the psyche that is associated with the ego, but also with painful issues, problems, and so on. But in addition, they learn to focus on the emotions like I did, so that the deeper underlying emotions can now come up completely without doing anything with them. So they can again and again be released. And at the point tipping over into this ecstasy and this no self state again. It's for sure an extreme method, let's call it method. I know this is extremely good from my own experience, but with deeper underlying trauma, development trauma, complex trauma, especially not only from early childhood, but from baby time and other psychological problems, underlying psychological instabilities and problems can also lead to massive disorientation symptoms, massive other problems, persistent reoccurring confusion. The whole nervous system not only tries to reorganize itself again and again, but also resets again and again concretely in these inner psychic breakdowns. The problem I see here is definitely that some people trying to make a truth out of these experiences. Which can in fact feel absolutely liberating and unbelievably great, of course. So the problem is when someone makes a truth out of it, want to cling to this experience and get addicted to it, and therefore overdoing it when it becomes a method. So with deeper underlying complex traumas, it's become a real hell for years, for 10 years, for 15 years, whatever. For some spiritual speakers, it might have somehow worked out this rigid, one-dimensional, extreme attitude, maybe because they didn't have so much deep trauma, but this is why maybe they don't check at all what the nonsensical statements, the claims to truth, and the stupid recommendations for other people might mean. For some speakers, it seems to me that they have actually gotten used to sort of train themselves out of their ability to understand complex relationships, other people, psychic issues. They train themselves out of all these complex relations in the mind, the psyche, me and you, and trained in abstinence from all of that. Because of their rigid, dogmatic concepts and truths, they refuse to start again at some point to think about more complicated things, to get back into, I would say, healthy ego things and sense, and to relearn all this in a new, healthier way. They not only dissolve carefully all of the difficult issues, relationship issues, issues that are rooted in the past, or all traumatic issues, and let's say their sense of self, their identification related to these issues, but with their rigid, dogmatic, one-dimensional approach, let's say their sense of self, one-dimensional approach, and making a truth, and making a truth out of it, they release or rather dissolve their whole sense of self altogether across the board. This can only work for a very few people, let's say some handful of them, that can get used to this strange kind of being, let's say. But unfortunately, they have absolutely no idea what this would mean for other people. So in my view, all the teachers that have this one-dimensional claim to truth, or these Advaita concepts like there is no one, it happens on its own, and so forth, and all the teachers that doesn't point out to the other side of the coin, the healthy ego, not bringing forth more therapeutic approaches and methods, psychological understanding, or things like getting more active in life, more authentic, more alive, more connected to your feelings and needs, are completely irresponsible in my view. Without getting over time a more healthy, strong, and flexible ego structure, more authentic, more individual, getting more mature, and working on your trauma and on your issues in a more therapeutic way without all of that spirituality is for me completely nonsense, destructive, and an absolute irresponsible experiment with high risks. Thanks for watching. Questions or reports you can put in the comments or send me an email. See you next time. Bye bye.